Okay, folks. So we are 1 month into Battle for Azeroth, and over that month, there's been things that I've wanted to talk about, and I really wasn't sure how to go about it necessarily. Things that didn't seem like they warranted their own videos per se, and I was trying to think of how to do kind of a all-inclusive video, if you will, and thought about doing like a state of, and I thought, well, because that was the intent for that, was to do kind of a progressive as changes happened in the game. Um, However, that seems to work well for classes and specs, so I was trying to leave that be for the time being. And I had another idea for a Let's Talk series, which for all intents and purposes is similar to the state of, just not as detailed. This is going to be more kind of rapid fire. I'm just going to kind of go down my list of things that I wanted to talk about and then just kind of mention what I liked, what I didn't, and then just move on. So, with that said, let's talk about Battle for Azeroth 1 month later, I guess would be the way to put it. So, starting with leveling. For the most part, I liked leveling. The leveling I've seen on the Alliance side, the Horde side, there was a good variety of quests, I'll say. You don't really expect a lot from leveling. It was kind of the same thing we've done before. However, with phasing and different things, there's a little more little things make it enjoyable, more enjoyable than it might otherwise be, or than it is in some of the older parts of the game. Let's put it that way. Um, Most everybody, I'm guessing, has at least quested through one zone by now, so I don't think I'm spoiling anything by saying probably the thing I liked the most was what they've done with cinematics in this expansion. I don't remember them doing anything like that before, unless it was like the end of a storyline or something like that. My only complaint would be, and this is kind of a general complaint throughout the game, is with the stat squish. It seems to be having more of a impact than it did during Warlords. There were a few times as I was questing, depending on the area, if there were a lot of mobs around, it just seemed like I had a harder time. I kept pulling things when I didn't mean to, and I had to stop, and it took a little longer, and it got frustrating a few times. But those moments were few and far between. So, um, dungeons would be the next thing. I'm of two minds with dungeons, and here's why. Uh, each side gets their own dungeons to start with. Each side gets three quote unquote different dungeons. Once you hit 120, you can do everything, but leveling up, um, you get three dungeons that each dungeon has some correlation with one of the zones in your starting on your starting island. Um, that's all great. However, and then at 115 you unlock a fourth dungeon. Um, however, I I go back and forth. On one hand, it was nice knowing what you were queuing into. On the other hand, it did get kind of monotonous after about the umpteenth time. Being that I play mostly as a healer, I wanted to heal. I wanted to do dungeons and heal. You can get questing can get a little boring after a while. I don't particularly care for questing all that much, despite the fact that I enjoyed leveling. It's just not my thing. I'm not one of those people that can go out there and just quest and quest and quest and quest and quest. So by the end, I was pretty well tired of the 4 dungeons that I had been doing. So, and my biggest complaint, my biggest criticism, I was going to say, after you've done them so many times, you've gotten a lot of loot from them, so there's not really an incentive other than experience. My other, my main complaint about dungeons would be that the lack of weapons. Seeing as we just came from an expansion where artifacts were such a important part, such a big part of the expansion, I was surprised that there were so few and far between weapons in the both dungeons and quests alike. Being that I am a shaman, I use a caster shield. I had the hardest time getting a shield. I ended up replacing my artifact with a green shield to begin with, I think. I think one finally did drop from a dungeon. I'm trying to think. I think one did. But there was only one out of the 4 that dropped a shield, which to me is just ridiculous. And then it wasn't until I did Mythics that I actually got a purple shield. World Quest did not have. I haven't seen a shield yet in a World Quest. I've seen maces. I've seen daggers. I have not seen a shield. So that was probably my biggest complaint, is I kept wanting to. I was replacing like everything else, but not that. I replaced my weapon several times. There were a few different, again, not as many as you would think, but there were a few maces, daggers, things like that. Those are more universal items than a shield, I understand. That's one reason why I like playing Shaman, because you get to wear a shield. It's part of the fantasy and everything. And the shield, the other thing is, from a stats perspective, the shield gives you block, it gives you armor, it gives you stats, things like that. There were staffs that dropped. You usually don't want to replace a shield with a staff. That's usually not going to be an upgrade, and you usually don't see a resto shaman using a staff. There's a reason why we use shields and, more often than not, maces. We can use daggers and other things, or we can use two-handed maces for some reason. I think that may be an older reason. I think that may have had more relevance in older parts of the game before I started playing. I digress. So that was kind of a uphill battle. That was kind of frustrating for me. There really wasn't any one thing to do. It just came down to running something and then it dropping, basically. So Azarite Armor. Um, to to be blunt, I don't like it. Um, I've had uh, I've had armor from quests. I've had armor from world bosses, from mythics. I've had blue Azarite armor. I've had purple Azarite armor. I don't like it. It's too random. The enhancements it gives you, they're the same enhancements that Legion legendaries gave you, basically. And with that, they said towards the end of Legion, Blizzard made the statement that, giving you a legendary, giving you something with, maybe slightly lesser stats for what we thought would be a useful utility in hindsight was perhaps not the best of ideas. So they turn around and give you a piece of gear that has no secondary stats and random um, utilities that you have to constantly keep replacing, constantly keep going through more random utilities, and then or then you have to upgrade your Herd of Azeroth in order to use more abilities. Yeah, I don't like it. I've given it a try. I was really excited about it when I first heard about it. Um, in my mind, I related it to the crafted armor in Warlords. You could only have 3 pieces. You upgraded those pieces as the expansion went on. They gave you new materials that you needed to upgrade your gear. Um, I'm I go through phases with professions, I think would be the best way to explain it. While I'm not the biggest, I find professions tedious. However, um, there have been expansions, or there have been times where, like I said, just kind of phases where I like binge on them for a while, and I'll make gadgets or something, or I'll make armor or something, and then I'm just like, okay, I'm done with this, and then I'll go on and do something else, and then it'll be an expansion or whatever before I do anything with it again. Um, so in Warlord, so I liked being able to do that. It was simple. Um, you could get the materials with a little bit of work. Um, they weren't ridiculously difficult. It wasn't a grind, but it wasn't something that you, you know, like I said, you had to do a little bit of work. I remember some things dropped off of the world boss there at Tanan Jungle, as I recall. Um, so I mean, you had to put a little bit of effort into it, and that was fine. I probably have more crafted gear from Warlords because of upgrading it, and each upgrade gave you a different appearance. Um, so I think you ended up there were like 6 levels, and I think you ended up with like 3 different appearances. So that's what I kind of was thinking with Azarite Armor. If I'd have known it was going to be random utilities, and then you're swapping them out, then you're picking, maybe the same utility, maybe a different utility, maybe a mismatch of utilities. Um, One, it doesn't seem like they changed their approach from Legion legendaries. And 2, it's just too random, especially for a healer. When I find utilities that I like that increase critical strike, or that increase my abilities, that's another thing. Is you either have to pick something that is universal, that will work on all 3 specs, or you have to pick something that is ridiculously spec specific. And to me, that just kind of defeats the point. You either have to have multiple sets of Azarite armor, which is why our gear has agility, intellect, and strength, so we don't have to go through all of that anymore. Or, as I said, you just have to pick like either universal traits or kind of a mismatch, or just go spec specific. To me, I don't see the point. That's probably my biggest complaint with the expansion so far is Azarite Armor. It seems like a great idea that was just poorly executed. That I think is fair. I think that is a fair criticism of it. World Quest. Moving right along. That was a little longer of a rant than what I was intending. World Quest. World Quest seem fine, just as they were in Legion. I'm glad they kept World Quest. I like World Quest. Everybody seemed to like World Quest. It's not really a criticism, it's more of an observation. I think I've noticed that's different between Legion and Battle for Azeroth is there's not as much gear that you can get in Battle for Azeroth. Like I said, I've seen some maces, I've seen some daggers, have not seen a shield. There's a lot of the gear is, at this point, it's below what I have. I've done Mythic, so everything, I have a lot of purple, and everything that drops is blue. Or everything that's a reward, I should say, doesn't drop. Everything that's a reward is blue, and things don't seem to upgrade. They made a big deal about saying they were going to leave in, Warforged and Titanforged and all of that, and I don't seem to be getting the upgrades quite as often as it seems like I used to in the last, I think Warlords had it, so Warlords and Legion, which is a bit strange. Otherwise, I really have no complaints. I think you can, I know a lot of people are making a big deal about, well, if you have War Mode on, you get more, you get like 10% more gold and all this other stuff from Quest. It's not really a big enough difference from what I can tell to leave it on. If you don't want it on, that's fine. You're not putting yourself at any grave disadvantage or anything like that. Island expeditions. A lot of people were complaining about Warfronts. I have more of a complaint with island expeditions in that they're nice. I understand the point was that you were a player team versus an AI team. However, I don't really see the point of them. I've been doing them just for the rep, just to help with my rep grind at the moment. And I've done normal, heroic, and mythic. I haven't done PvP yet because I haven't found a PvP group when I've looked. And I typically don't like to start groups because I'm not always sure what I'm doing, to be perfectly honest. So, and I find I tend to enjoy things more if I'm not the one. I'm fine not being in charge. So, there is a bit of strategy to it. Normal, it doesn't really matter what roles you are. Heroic, so. Mythic, I would definitely say you at least need one healer. Mythic and heroic, if you wanted to do them and be sure you were going to, um, if you wanted to better your odds, I would say go ahead and take a healer or find a healer. Um, I've done normal and heroic with all DPS. I've done heroic and mythic with healers, and mythic without a healer is basically you just keep getting one-shotted and everybody just keeps dying and you really get nowhere. That said, there's a bunch of random things you can get, a bunch of pets, a bunch of mounts, things like that. People really weren't sure how you were to get them, though, if it was just a random thing or if there was something you could do. You do get doubloons, which are from what I can tell, just a specific currency to that. I hadn't really looked into it that much because I really hadn't had much interest in it. You don't seem to have any trouble getting them, though. Outside of that, it just doesn't seem like there's much of a point to it. And I kept thinking as I was doing it, it felt more like an arena. It felt more like PvP. I think they would have been better off putting in some kind of PvP mode. Aside from, I don't mean, you know, like I said, putting in like just a PvP. I mean actually just making it a map of some kind, making a third. You know, we have arenas, we have skirmishes, we have battlegrounds, all this stuff. Just make it something like that. Even if it was still AI, just make it more PvP focused. I think that would have done far better than what it is now. To me, it just seems pointless. And it's weird to say that because the biggest complaint is, well, there's not enough content, and now we're looking at content going, this is just pointless. There seems to be a problem with, and of the ones I've done, maybe a dozen, and I've gotten one pet out of doing a dozen. That's it. I've gotten Azarite power every other time. So I'm indifferent to them. If they continue on, fine. If they don't, fine. You do get a decent amount of rep from it, and you do get a decent amount of Azarite power. However, there's really no point in doing it for Azarite power when it is so prevalent everywhere else in the game. Lastly, Warfronts. Warfronts is the last things you unlock. They're fairly new, so do take this with a grain of salt. A lot of people have been criticizing them for not having enough to do. And I disagree. Granted, it's not a continuous thing. It's not a grind. It's not like Tanan Jungle where you pick up a mission and you go do something for that day. It's not that kind of a thing. Once you do your intro quest to it, there's nothing else to do. There's no quests or anything to do there until the Alliance faction controls takes control from the Horde. It started with the Horde having control on my server. I think it started that way on all servers. The reason why I say I disagree is there's a world boss. There is rares all over the place. it's a nice little, we don't always need something to do. We don't always need something to grind. Sometimes you just need something to do just for the sake of just doing it and just for fun. That's it. The rares have a chance to drop gear, um, which is part of a set. So, I mean, there is something you can work towards. I imagine, like with most, it's listed under PvP gear. So I imagine, like most PvP gear, once the season ends, you'll be able to go and buy it with your marks of honor. My one disappointment, and I can understand people being disappointed in it. I understand that point of view. I just don't happen to agree with it. The only thing I'm disappointed about is I thought when you look at your command table for it, it says Q. So I was under the impression, it was not explained very well in game. I was under the impression once it got to a certain point, we would be able to queue with the Horde and do some kind of either like a scenario or like PvP or something like that, and we don't. We have to wait for, as I said, we have to wait for the Alliance to take control from the Horde, take control of Arathi Highlands. So, yeah, not overall thoughts. So far, I actually think it's better than what I thought. It's not a perfect expansion. However, there's a lot of things that people seem to like the world quests, like the leveling, being able to go to start in any zone and level. Little things. I can see where Blizzard is trying. I will definitely give them the benefit of the doubt. This expansion, is it a perfect expansion? No. However, despite what some people may tell you, there is no perfect expansion. I've heard people, in almost 10 years of playing this, I've heard people argue that vanilla was the best. No, it wasn't. I've heard people argue that Burning Crusade was the best. No, it wasn't. Wrath of the Lich King is the closest expansion to universally being beloved by everybody. And even that has people that that don't like certain parts of it. I think with Wrath of the Lich King, a lot of people started playing during Wrath of the Lich King. I started playing slightly after that, so I think that was the peak of the subscribers. After that, things started to fall off through Cataclysm and Mists, and I assume into Legion. So one thing I will say for dungeons is, thinking, what will this expansion be remembered for? The dungeons do have way too much trash with way too many overtuned abilities. I don't mind if something's difficult, but when we're spending more time on the trash than we are on the boss, and the trash has more, as I said, I think it's a fair statement to say overtuned abilities. A lot of AoE abilities and things like that. As a healer, you notice things like that. Don't get me wrong, some bosses are pretty difficult. The only dungeon that I've had the most trouble with is Shrine of the Storms. a group might wipe on a boss here or there, but that's that's to be expected. People are people are still leveling and um, still kind of getting used. We're only 1 month into this. You can't expect everybody to be at the same place experience wise and knowledge wise 1 month into this. Um, Mythics aren't overly difficult, providing you know what you're doing. It's a good challenge, but it's not. It's not. They don't go overboard with it. So, for the most part, I think people will. And granted, we're 1 month into this. Um, if for whatever reason the expansion was to end today, for the sake of argument, um, I think people would look back mostly with positive things to say. It wasn't like I said, it wasn't a perfect expansion, but I can see just to emphasize this where Blizzard is trying. So I am. With that said, I am excited to see what the first patch will bring and things like that. I think, like I said, the stat squish. If you're thinking about coming back, or um, if for whatever reason you haven't played, or you haven't played that often or done as much in the game as I have, um, I think the stat squish has made things a little, like I said, it seems to be having more of an impact this time than it did in Warlords for some reason. Um, it just seems like not so much in terms of things being more difficult. Um, it's just it doesn't seem as balanced as it was before. So it's taking a little, like I said, they did that. They put they I'll learn to talk. They did the stat squish was the first thing they did in the pre-patch. We did. Um, we had the War of the Thorns, the pre-event. We did Dark Shore, all the quests that came with unlocking Dark Shore and completing the War of the Thorns. We've quested, we've done dungeons, PvP. People are doing raids now. I'm still getting used to it. That's why I said it doesn't seem to. It seems to be having more of an impact this time, and I'm not entirely sure why. So every time I think I've kind of gotten used to it, it's kind of a learning curve again. So um, yeah. So there we go, folks. So there's a little bit of a review of Battle for Azeroth 1 month later. So hope you enjoyed that, and thank you for watching.